Hello, everyone. Today, we are going to explore mixed methods research designs, which combine qualitative and quantitative approaches to give us a more comprehensive understanding of research problems that either qualitative or quantitative approaches alone cannot provide. When we use mixed methods, we are essentially getting the best of both. That is quantitative and qualitative. The quantitative methods give us the numbers and the statistical significance, whilst the qualitative methods provide depth, context, and why we do things the way we do. And then it also provides the why behind the numbers. When we use this together, they create a more complete picture of whatever phenomena we are trying to explore. In this particular session, our focus will be to try and understand the rationale and foundations of mixed methods research. We also try to explore the three major mixed methods design approaches, and then we look at some key considerations for selecting the appropriate design that will be suitable for our study. And then finally, we'll identify some implementation strategies and then the potential challenges that come with these strategies. Now that we have covered our learning objectives briefly, I want us to establish exactly what we mean by mixed methods research. As you can see on the slide, and as postulated by Creswell, they define mixed methods as simply an approach to inquiry that combines or integrates both qualitative and quantitative forms of research. Now, let me try and break the key elements down so that you'll be able to understand truly what we mean by mixed methods. First, mixed methods isn't just about having some numbers and some text in your research. That's not all what it is about. It is about deliberately collecting structured quantitative data. And then think of it this way, think of it in the context of surveys, experimental results, or even demographic information that can be measured in a numerical manner. And then we pitch that alongside qualitative data like interviews, focus groups, or even data from observations that capture the different experiences, the different perspectives, and the different contexts in terms of in terms of the phenomena we are studying. The second point is also very important, and this is where many researchers fall short of. True mixed methods research is not just presenting quantitative results in one chapter and then qualitative findings in another. The real power in this approach comes from meaningfully integrating the two main types of data from these two approaches. And so it involves some level of integration. And the integration might happen at different stages. The integration might happen during your data collection so that you can use qualitative findings to inform maybe your quantitative instruments. It can also happen during analysis, where you can compare data sets to identify the convergence or divergence. And then maybe you can also use it during interpretation, where you can use qualitative data to explain quantitative findings. So what you have to consider is that without integration, you essentially would have two separate studies rather than a mixed study. Now, the third point I want to highlight is sometimes overlooked by many researchers. The fact that mixed methods often requires reconciling different philosophical worldviews. Typically, we all know that when we're dealing with quantitative research, it typically comes from a positivist tradition, which focuses largely on what objectivity and generalization, while qualitative research often stems from constructivist, subjectivist, or interpretivist approaches, which emphasize subjective experiences and their context. Now, in terms of mixed methods, researchers typically would adopt pragmatism as their philosophical stance because it focuses on what works best to answer complex research questions rather than either a rigid positivist approach or a rigid interpretivist approach. Now, why mixed methods matter? Why do they matter? Now that we understand what mixed methods research is all about, let's talk about why it has become so important in today's research landscape. What you all have to understand is that the research world has changed dramatically over the past few decades. And so mixed methods approaches have also risen to meet some of the new challenges that have emerged. Now, the first issue I want us to look at would be a set of issues that center on contemporary research demands, and then we'll also look at what mixed methods research provide. Now, the first point on our slide speaks to the nature of contemporary challenges. You think about it in the context of, say, complex issues, multifaceted problems. For example, understanding why maybe a public health initiative succeeds in one community but fails in another community will require both maybe statistical understanding and also a deep contextual understanding. And so in an issue like this, using only quantitative methods might not show what happened because it will miss the why. And so we may have to use also qualitative methods to try and explain the rich local dynamics, which we may have missed using the quantitative approaches. We also have to consider that research today rarely serves just one group of people or one group of audience. You have to think about your study as looking at serving diverse audience. It needs to speak to policymakers who want statistical evidence. It also needs to provide practical insights and what have you. Now, whichever stakeholders you are trying to satisfy, each of these stakeholders needs different types of evidence. So policymakers might want to see the numbers showing maybe some improvement, while maybe others may need detailed descriptions of how certain interventions are working. Now, the other issue I want us to look at, which is the third issue on the slide, is the issue of generalizability. This third issue demand is actually very challenging because traditionally quantitative approaches are seen as excelling when it comes to generalizability and often may seem to lack some depth, whilst qualitative approaches provide rich context but struggle with broader applicability. So in order to bridge the gap, we try to use what? Mixed methods. Mixed methods bridges this particular gap. And so you can use quantitative methods to establish some patterns across large populations. And then you can use qualitative approaches to provide the nuance and the context that makes the findings meaningful and actionable in that particular setting. So when we are using mixed methods, it comes with quite a number of benefits because it provides us with some comprehensive evidence that will draw on application from either quantitative approach and qualitative approach. Then it also tries, when we use mixed method, it also helps us to capture insights that we may overlook. For instance, if we are using quantitative, we may overlook certain things. If we are using qualitative, we may overlook certain things as well. But when we use mixed, we are able to what? Overcome the issue of overlooking some critical insight. Apart from that, it is critical for us to understand that when we use mixed methods, we are achieving methodological triangulation. And that is the final point. When different methods lead to similar conclusions, it will mean that our confidence in those findings will increase substantially. It will increase substantially. And so mixed methods actually gives us this opportunity for us to be able to methodologically triangulate, and our findings will be what? Will be very credible. It will increase the credibility of our findings. Now, in terms of philosophy, the philosophical foundations that will guide a mixed method research. If we understand the philosophical underpinnings that will underpin mixed methods, it will be very important. It is important because it will provide us with a guide as to how we approach knowledge creation using mixed methods, and it will also help us to justify some number of methodological choices. Now, what are the key tenets of pragmatism? If we are arguing that pragmatism would be the most practicable philosophy that we can use alongside mixed methods. The key tenets are the focus on what? On practical outcomes rather than abstract truths. Then the second one is that what works to answer research questions is the most important thing. And so combining both qualitative and quantitative seem as a better way of a better approach that will work in terms of addressing complex phenomena. Then, last but not the least, knowledge should, when we are looking at pragmatism as a key philosophy for mixed methods, knowledge is seen as both what? Constructed and based on what? And based on reality. And so pragmatism is seen as a bridge that will transcend the qualitative and the quantitative dichotomy. It also, when we use pragmatism, it also values both the objective and the subjective knowledge that will come from both quantitative and qualitative approaches. And last but not the least, it embraces multiple perspectives and also it embraces multiple methods. There are other philosophical perspectives that could also be used alongside mixed methods. Critical realism could be used as well. But our emphasis here is on what? The use of what? Pragmatism as one key philosophy that can be used to guide our mixed methods research design. Now that we understand the philosophical underpinnings, and we agree that pragmatism may be the most practicable alternative, the most practicable approach in terms of philosophy to align with a mixed methods research design, I want us to explore the core operational principles that guide mixed method research in practice. These principles translate the philosophical position of pragmatism into what? Into concrete research approaches. And the first one is what we refer to as methodological eclecticism. So what this particular term is basically about choosing the right tools for the job, regardless of their traditional disciplinary boundaries. Choosing the right tool for the job, regardless of the traditional disciplinary boundaries. It's like being, say, a skilled craftsman who selects maybe different tools based on what the task requires him to perform, rather than limiting himself to just maybe hammers and screws. So depending on what one wants to do, we look at a tool that will be what? Right for the job. So in terms of business research, this methodological eclecticism may mean using statistical modeling maybe to understand, say, market trends, while also employing maybe observation or maybe ethnography, some qualitative methodology to try to understand maybe consumer behavior to blend with what we're looking at qualitatively. The selection is driven by what would best answer our research question. And so it is very important. The core principle that guide mixed method research is using the right tool for the right job. Then the second one is many of us maybe were trained in specific research traditions, say maybe quantitative with positivism. You see, what methodological eclecticism gives us is that it gives us the permission to break free from the constraints, the traditional constraints we may be holding. But it doesn't mean abandoning maybe rigor. It doesn't mean that. It's rather quite the opposite. What it basically means is that you are applying appropriate standards of quality for each method you are going to use or rely on, rather than judging all methods by the standards of say a single tradition. Now, the guiding principle in terms of focus on fitness is basically about utility, because methods are selected based on how well they serve their research purpose. That's how we select methods. We don't select research method based on the researcher's preference or disciplinary tradition. We select it based on how well that particular approach will serve the research purpose. And this requires researchers to clearly try to articulate their research questions carefully and clearly, and then in a very thoughtful manner, so that they can select the research methods that will best address their questions very effectively. The second part of the core principles I want us to look at is what we refer to as paradigm pluralism. And this principle basically acknowledges that different philosophical worldviews can coexist within a single research project. And that is basically what mixed method research is trying to do. So for instance, parts of your study might embrace a more positive approach, maybe seeking objectivity, measuring patterns, while maybe other parts of your research components may be looking at exploring subjective meanings exploring subjective experiences. And so, rather than seeing the differences between the paradigms as being a problem, what mixed method researchers actually do is they view the tensions as being what? As being productive. So when different paradigms come together, for the mixed method researcher, they see it as yielding what? Different insights, because it will help create valuable opportunities for what? For the researcher to be able to attain a deeper understanding. Then there's also the issue of using the differences in a productive manner. And this is the final thing I want to emphasize. And this particular point emphasizes that the differences in terms of the paradigms can actually enhance research quality. It can help in enhancing research quality, because by deliberately incorporating multiple perspectives, either from positivism or from interpretivism, what we are basically doing is that we can develop more comprehensive understanding of what? Of very complex phenomena. Okay. Now, the third core principle is what? The emphasis on what? Diversity. When we rely on mixed methods research, it means that we are recognizing that complex phenomena can be understood more comprehensively when we examine this particular phenomenon from what? From multiple angles. It's like looking at a sculpture. The sculpture will view it from only one side. That will give a limited understanding. But when you view it from another side, it will give you a much, much broader understanding. Then there's also the issue of divergent findings, seeing divergent findings as what? As an opportunity. And one of the most valuable aspects of mixed methods research is that when quantitative and qualitative findings don't align, it provides an opportunity. Let me say it again. When mixed methods research in terms of quantitative and qualitative findings don't align, as a researcher, rather than seeing this as a problem, mixed methods researchers view this as a big opportunity for them to be able to delve deeper, to get deeper and deeper insights and deeper understandings of whatever phenomena they are looking at. Then we also have the issue of incorporating diverse stakeholder views. Mixed methods is particularly effective for incorporating perspectives from what? From various stakeholders. The last part of the core principles I want us to look at is the continual iteration. So you see, traditional research often follows, say, a linear path from hypothesis to, say, data collection to analysis. When we are looking at mixed methods research, they embrace a more cyclical approach, a more iterative approach, where maybe findings from one phase may inform or modify the other aspect in that order. It is an iterative process which allows researchers to respond to emerging insights and what? Unexpected findings. Then there's also the issue of ongoing dialogue between methods. When we are dealing with mixed methods, we need to be very dynamic, because this particular mixed methods research creates a dynamic relationship between what? Quantitative and qualitative components. So instead of keeping the strands, the quantitative strands and the qualitative strands separate, what mixed methods researchers do is that they try to create a dialogue between what? The quantitative and the qualitative process. So throughout the research process, there is a process of what? Dialogue. In practice, you might look, this particular process might look like, say, using an interview findings to try and influence maybe your survey questions, and then using the survey results to identify maybe what participants' in-depth insights may have been regarding a particular phenomenon. The last point I want to emphasize is the issue of reflexivity. Reflexivity involves continuously, as a researcher, you continuously examining how your own assumptions, your own decisions, and your own interpretations are shaping the research process and the findings. And when we are looking at mixed methods, it's particularly important because of the complex methodological choices we will make when we are dealing with what? With mixed methods. And so as a reflexive researchers, we will often ask questions like, why am I prioritizing certain data types over others? How might my integration approach influence my conclusion? And many, many more other questions. Now, the next thing I want us to look at is to try and look at how we can integrate both a quantitative and a qualitative approach in a mixed study. And so I consider this part as a critical aspect of mixed methods research, the process of what? Integration. I mentioned earlier that simply using both quantitative and qualitative methods in a study doesn't make your study what? Mixed methods. The defining feature is how these different data types, these different approaches, and the findings that are coming from it, the important thing is how they are what? They are integrated. So we're going to look at the levels of integration. We have design integration, and the design integration basically looks at how the data is what? Is conceptualized. Then we also have methods integration, and the methods integration look at how the data are collected. Then we also have analysis integration, which looks at how data are interpreted what? Are interpreted together. And then the last but not the least, reporting integration, which tries to indicate or show us how the findings are what? Are presented together. So there are different strategies that one can use to be able to integrate. There are different strategies. The first one is merging your data sets as a strategy. This particular strategy is common in what we refer to as convergent designs, where quantitative and qualitative data are collected at the same time, simultaneously. And so merging would involve bringing the data sets together for joint analysis. So for example, if you are studying, say, organizational culture, you might analyze survey data alongside coded interview responses about the same cultural dimensions. And then you try to do what? You try to look for patterns of agreement and what? And disagreements. Then the second aspect or the second strategy is what? Connecting phases of what? Research. This strategy is used in a sequential design where findings from one phase informs what? The next. You see, the connection points are crucial for integration here. And so what we may refer to as an explanatory sequential design, for instance, you would explicitly select, say, interviews based on survey responses, and then you develop the interview questions that probe surprising survey findings. Okay. Then the last one is what? The last but not the least is embedding one form of data within another. What you do here is that one data type will play a supplementary role within your study. And this is primarily based on the other one's data type. For example, you may have open-ended questions embedded within a largely quantitative survey, or maybe a small quantitative component within what? An ethnographic study, you see. So practically in business research, this might look like incorporating, say, small scale market testing within primarily qualitative study of what? Say, consumer behavior. Then the last one is what? Using a theoretical framework. And this strategy uses theory as the integrative element. It uses theory as the integrative element. So a short theoretical framework would be used to do what? To guide both the quantitative and the qualitative components. And then you will provide a structure for bringing the findings together. Okay. Now, I want us to look at the major mixed methods design approaches. So now that we have covered the philosophical foundations and maybe the core principles, I want us to examine the three primary design approaches. The primary design approaches by using some visualizations. We'll use some visual. So the three primary mixed method designs are convergent design, explanatory sequential design, exploratory sequential design. And the key decision factors in terms of which one you use will depend on what? The timing of your data collection. Are you going to do your data collection the same time that is concurrent, or you are going to do it in a sequential manner such that one will inform the other? So timing of data collection is very important in determining which of the mixed methods design approaches you use. The other issue is what? The priority of your methods. The priority of your methods. Are the methods going to be used equally, or one is going to be dominant than the other? Then we also have to consider the purpose of integration. And then lastly, the available resources and expertise at your disposal. So let's look at the first one. Let's look more closely at the first one, which is the convergent design. The convergent design is one of the most straightforward, but yet powerful mixed methods approaches. As you can see in the diagram, this design feature, basically what it does is that there's a parallel stream of research that will eventually come together. So one, there's concurrent data collection. In a convergent design, quantitative and qualitative data are collected during the same phase of the research. This doesn't necessarily mean on the same day or the same time. This concurrent approach is efficient, it's very efficient, and particularly valuable when you have limited time for field work or when you need to capture both types of data about the phenomena whilst it's occurring. So you must do it, otherwise you will lose the opportunity to be able to capture it. So a typical example is if you are studying a business implementing a new organizational structure, you might simultaneously administer your questionnaire for the quantitative data and conduct management interviews to get what? The qualitative data. Another approach is that you may do separate analysis, but initially, each data type will be analyzed using what? Appropriate methods for that particular tradition. So quantitative data may undergo statistical analysis, whilst the qualitative data is what? Subjected to thematic analysis, coding, or other qualitative analytical approach. This separate analysis respects the integrity and uniqueness of what? The contribution of each method. But the most critical part is that is at the stage of integration at interpretation. And this is a defining feature of the convergent design. And basically what it does is that integration happens primarily at the interpretation what? Phase, after both data sets have been what? Analyzed separately. And this is where the researchers actively will compare and contrast the findings, trying to look for confirmation where the findings from the both methods are agreeing, looking for expansion where one method adds up some depth to the findings of the other. And maybe sometimes the researcher may be looking for what we refer to as discordance, where the findings appear to be contradicting each other. Now, the issue is, when do we actually use the convergent design? So the convergent design is particularly appropriate when you want to develop a more complete understanding of a topic, or you want to validate one set of findings with another. And then also, if you have equal expertise, you are knowledgeable in both qualitative and quantitative, and you can do both together. Sometimes too, you may have limited opportunities for data collection, so you just want to do both at the same time. Okay. Now, that is about convergent design. What are the key characteristics? Let's dive deeper into the specific features of a convergent design so that you can understand exactly how to implement this particular approach. So basically what this slide does is that it builds on the previous overview I have provided by highlighting the defining features and procedural steps. So the key features are, as indicated, simultaneous or parallel data collection, independent analysis of each data type, and then integration or equal or varied priority will be given. So the procedural steps basically are: you collect both data types concurrently, you analyze each data set separately using the appropriate methods, and then you merge your results through what? Comparison, transformation, or joint display. And then you interpret to the extent that the results will converge, diverge, or what? Or relate. When do we use it? We use it when there's a need for comprehensive understanding of a phenomena, when we have limited time for sequential data collection, and when we are placing equal value of both forms of data, and then also when we have that strong desire to triangulate our findings. The key strength of this particular approach is that it is efficient. It provides an efficient use of time because we collect the data together, immediate confirmation or disconfirmation of our findings because we are using the two approaches, and then it gives us a complete picture through complementary data. And then the last but not the least key strength is that it provides an intuitive approach for researchers who are new to what? Mixed methods. Then what are the problems? The common challenges. The common challenges are that different sample sizes may occur between the qualitative and the quantitative. And then you may also come across contradictory findings, which will require serious reconciliation. And then also the difficulties in merging your data if you are not, as indicated, if you are not an expert in this area. Then the need for expertise in both methodologies is very, very critical. Then the strategies you may need to adopt to address this will be that you have to be able to plan to have what? Comparable samples when possible, using joint displays to visualize your relationships, and then developing a clear integration framework before the data collection. And then maybe working with other people, especially when you are working in multidisciplinary teams. Now let's transition from discussing convergent design to what? To exploring another type, which is the explanatory sequential design. As you can see in the diagram, this approach follows a distinct linear progression rather than what? Parallel. So the key concept and structure is that explanatory sequential designs are characterized by a two-phase structure, two phases, where quantitative data collection and analysis is conducted first. And this is followed by qualitative methods that will help you explain the initial quantitative results. The diagram clearly shows this progression through three distinct phases. Phase one. In the first phase, you collect and analyze quantitative data. This might include surveys or questionnaires, structured observations, experimental designs, secondary data analysis of numerical data sets, and what have you. Then, at this particular stage, the goal is to identify patterns, relationships, and significant findings that provide a broad overview of your topic. And then you move to what? Your initial results. The results of your quantitative analysis serve as a connection point between the next phase. So these results you will get may be particularly unexpected or maybe significant, will inform what you will explore in what? In the qualitative stage or qualitative phase. So the second phase, which is the qualitative phase, then involves qualitative data collection specifically designed to help you explain your quantitative results. And this might include using in-depth interviews, focus groups, and maybe some case studies. And here you have to analyze text data or documents as well as observations. So you see the qualitative component is deliberately targeted to shed light on the why and the how behind the quantitative findings you got in what? In phase one. And then the last bit, the last stage phase is what? Interpretation. In the final phase, you interpret how the qualitative findings helps you to explain the initial quantitative results. And this is where the true integration would happen. The qualitative data provides context and explanatory power to the statistical patterns you identified in your earlier quantitative approach. Now, the key features, two distinct sequential phases, as I have indicated. So you have quantitative methods, which will come first, followed by what? Qualitative. Then you will have a qualitative phase, which will build directly on what? Your quantitative results. Typically, we prioritize the quantitative data so that we inform the qualitative. Then the procedural steps are you collect and analyze quantitative data, identify results needing further explanation, then you now design your qualitative phase to explain these results. Collect your qualitative data, and then you interpret. When do we use it? We use it to be able to explain surprising, contradictory, or unusual results. We also use it to add depth to statistical findings. And then we also use it to provide strong quantitative orientation in whatever discipline we are in. Last but not the least, it provides an opportunity for us to look at our research questions that will emerge from quantitative findings. It is a very strong approach because it is clear and straightforward. It is also manageable for individual researchers and particularly very valuable for explaining unexpected results. And largely, it appeals to quantitatively oriented audiences. It also comes with quite a number of challenges. It requires a lot of time for you to conduct the sequential implementation. The decisions about the participant selection for the second phase can be quite cumbersome. Reconciling the framework, the shifts can also be difficult. Then determining which quantitative results you can use to explain the qualitative. Then the strategies to address that would be to look at realistic timelines. They're also using purposeful sampling strategies linking to quantitative results can be a strategy that can help. Your protocols need to be very clearly defined so that the phases can connect to each other. Okay. Now let's look at the last one. Now we'll turn to our third major mixed method approach, which is the exploratory sequential design. As you can see from the diagram, this essentially reverses the order of the explanatory sequential design we just looked at. Now, the key concept here is that exploratory sequential design begins with qualitative exploration, and then we will use that to inform the subsequent quantitative research, as shown in the diagram. So the first phase involves qualitative research, qualitative data collection and analysis. And then when we get the results will now inform the quantitative data collection and analysis. And then when we get the results, it will all now feed to the third stage or phase, which is the integration stage. Okay. Now the key features are we have two distinct, just like the explanatory sequential design, we have two distinct sequential phases. But here, the qualitative methods will precede the quantitative. Also, the quantitative phase builds on the qualitative. And then here we are prioritizing the qualitative over what? The quantitative. And the procedural steps are indicated, something I have already explained. When do we use it? We use exploratory sequential design when the variables or measures we are going to look at are unknown. So for instance, in PLSM analysis, when we are looking at latent variables that are difficult to measure, we will use this particular exploratory sequential design. When we also have no appropriate instruments or scales existing to guide us, we can use this approach. When also there's a need to develop and test a new theory, this is also very suitable. And also when there's a need to understand phenomena before measuring it, we can also use this. Okay. Now the key strengths are that it has got a grounding of quantitative phase in grounding the grounding of quantitative phase in participant experiences. Then the second one is development of contextual appropriate instruments. Then it combines discoveries in such a way that it can help us to be able to generalize more appropriately. Now, the last thing I want us to look at is the exploratory sequential design challenges. Like all mixed method approaches, this particular approach has also got some challenges. One significant challenge is the substantial time you would need to develop high quality instruments based on your qualitative findings. Then also the issue of transitioning from qualitative teams to measurable constructs. Converting rich qualitative teams into quantifiable constructs can be a very difficult thing to do. Then the third one is the fact that you would have different sampling across the two phases. So you have a qualitative phase, quantitative phase, the sampling will be different. That's quite a challenge. And then there's also the risk of losing the nuance from the qualitative phase, which is supposed to be used to influence the quantitative. How can you overcome this? What strategies can you use to be able to overcome this? To do that, you need to plan your research schedule with adequate time. You have to plan very well so that you have adequate time to complete your qualitative analysis before beginning to develop your instruments. When you have developed your instruments, you will also have to take some time to do to test it. Pilot testing is very important. You have to pilot test it to be sure. Okay, so the process involved the process for you to develop your instrument should be very, very, very rigorous. Apart from that, you need to have clear connection between your qualitative findings and your quantitative measures, because it is the qualitative findings that are supposed to inform your quantitative measures. And last but not the least, you need to maintain a qualitative context in your final interpretation. Very, very important. This brings us to the end of our session. Thank you.